And we're live. Hey, my favorite quarantiners, how are you? Sorry about yesterday. I got a little bit confused with the schedule given the long holiday, but I'm here now. If you don't have a chance to watch this video live with me at this moment, maybe you're doing your other schoolwork, make sure that you watch it later because it's going to help you with your quizzes and any other assignments. Okay? Well, I have one person on. Hello, whoever that is. So I'm going to turn this off and go and share screen with you. And I'm going to share my McGraw-Hill ebook screen. Oh, I got two people on. Hello. Say hi if you're there. It's nice to have an audience in a way. So guys, we finished lesson 2. Okay, we were talking about how the Supreme Court is very important in that it's the law of the land. The president does have some executive power, but he doesn't have complete power. We talked about judicial review, which the first case was during Marbury versus Madison. And it means that the Supreme Court can look at a law and say, hey, we don't think this is constitutional, so we are going to review it, look at it, and we have the option to overturn it, means change it. We talked about the 3 branches of government: the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the executive branch. Remember, judicial, think judges, right? So that's the Supreme Court. Legislative, think laws, LL, right? That would be our friends in the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have a bicameral legislation in America. In Brazil too. And the executive, they execute, they do the law, okay? And this is mostly, the most important, of course, is the president. But we have the military, police, Department of Education, all these people that go and actually do the laws of the land. They execute the laws of the land. That's why it's the executive branch. And the founding fathers tried to make it so the executive branch was the weakest branch because you don't want the president turning into a dictator and taking power using the military. And that's about it. I'm looking at some of these review. How do these 3 branches share, check, and balance power? You got to know that for your test. So let's move on to lesson 3 if this allows, because sometimes the ebook tends to lock. Okay, if anybody is on, I'll just keep checking in case you have any questions. So we're going to try to get just through lesson 3. It's a long lesson. There's 12 pages. So we'll be on from 1:30 to 3. Okay, and then I have to eat something. I haven't had lunch. I wanted to start a little earlier, but I couldn't. Anyway, why and how was the U.S. Constitution? Why and how has the U.S. Constitution been amended and interpreted throughout our history? So think about this. There have been 27 amendments to the Constitution in 225 years. And these continue to be the laws of the land. These are the extreme laws of the land. And they talk about the economy, about society, about voting, about presidents. Remember, FDR was president for 4 terms, and they changed that in the Constitution. So the Constitution can be amended. This is the term we use in English. But it's not an easy thing to do, okay? And in fact, one amendment was actually taken out, right? It was overturned. You can't really take it out. It was overturned, and that's prohibition. So what's the process? Okay, what's the process? Now remember, when the Constitution was written in 1787, there were less than 4 million people, right? In the United States, now there's over 300 million people, 50 states. So the Constitution needs to change to meet the demands of the society. So it's really nice that they created a document that's flexible so that we don't have to create a whole new constitution every time. Like this, I only found out when I came to Brazil. I didn't realize Brazil had so many constitutions. For me, that seems a little bit more complicated than just creating a document, which can be changed over time. So one of the changes is amendments, which is explained in Article 5, okay? And there are two steps to amending the Constitution. First, you have to propose the amendment, and you have to ratify this amendment. And ratifying means voting yes. Remember, there was even ratification. Hi, look who it is. It's Jason. Look who it is. It's Little John. I haven't seen Little John in a while. How are you, João Victor Contini? Let me say hi to you guys like this. You can see me in a second. Oh, no, my camera's off. Hey, guys. Let's go back to the big view so that you can see the screen. So yes, the Constitution can be changed by, first you have to propose a law. Hey, we think that Black people should vote. We think that women should vote, right? So we propose this law, and then this becomes part of the law of the land if all the 50 states say, yes, we think that this is a good law for everybody to follow, okay, in American society. So how do you propose an amendment? Okay, there's two ways to propose them and two ways to ratify them. One method of proposing it is by a 2/3 vote in the House or the Senate, 2/3. And the other way is for a 2/3 vote of the states. And then they have to ask Congress to call a convention to debate and then vote for the proposed amendment. I think the most recent case of this was the ERA, the Equal Rights Act of the 1980s. It didn't pass, but it was a proposed amendment to the Constitution which would give women equal rights in society as far as pay and everything like that, and it did not pass everything. So that's a cool history if you're into this. If you go to Google, ERA amendment, not era, and we'll wait for that to load. Oh, there it is, it loaded. Okay, so the Equal Rights Amendment was, or is, because it still exists, a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution designed to guarantee equal rights for all American citizens regardless of sex. It seeks to end the legal distinction between men and women in the matters of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. But it didn't pass. I believe that, let me see if we can find a quick answer here about when it passed. I'll let that load, but we'll continue here. Well, that's loading, but that's a cool history, and you can see how all these things that we're learning now still affect the US government today, okay? So all of the current amendments, there are 27, were proposed using the congressional method, and dozens of new proposals are introduced to Congress every year, like limiting income tax, limiting how long the Supreme Court justices can be there, because remember, they can be there. Well, they can. They are there for their whole life, basically, until they die. Giving states control to oil deposits, but none of them have won the necessary 2/3 vote. And when an amendment is proposed, the Congress needs to choose one of the two methods to obtain state approval. Okay? The legislature and 3/4 of the states can ratify the amendment. And the other method is for states to hold a special convention and then have 3/4 of the conventions approve it. So what does that mean? If I want to make a law that's going to be for everybody in America, a constitutional law at that, not just a federal law, then I have to get the majority of the states to say yes, right? Because if the majority don't say yes, it's unfair. Now remember, this is a constitutional amendment. This gives you rights. This is different than a federal law, which means that just something is allowed or not allowed. That would be like gay marriage, okay? There's not a constitutional amendment for gay marriage. Because it's not really a right. What was created was a law, or actually something saying that it's illegal to ban gay marriage. Okay, so if two men or two women want to get married in America, it's not illegal for them to do it. So this is different than a constitutional amendment that gives you rights. Okay, now imagine if gay people couldn't vote. Then yes, we could try to create a constitutional amendment saying we want to give this right. We want to allow people to do something. Not that when people do something, it's illegal. Okay? Right now in America, the battle is with marijuana. Okay? A lot of states are making it legal. And maybe at some point, someone will try to say, hey, let's make this a federal law. So it covers all 50 states. We don't know what's going to happen with that. I believe it's probably going to continue being a state-by-state basis, because some states in America are more progressive, some are more conservative. And actually, this is why a lot of states were angry with Obama, because he was able to push for gay marriage to become legal, because some states said, hey, this is not part of our culture. We don't think this is right. So there's that debate. So almost all amendments have been ratified using the state legislature method. So we said we have conventions, okay, for the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment, okay, banning the sale of alcohol. For the 21st Amendment, Congress let each state legislator determine how many delegates would be elected for the ratifying, okay? So these are kind of the laws in the ways that ratifying happens. You can either just get all the states to say, or 3/4 of the states to say yes, or delegates from a state to say yes, and that would be how it works. So more than 11,000 amendments have been proposed, but only 27 have been ratified, because it's a really complicated process, guys, okay? Once you change the Constitution, this is like we already said, it's the supreme law of the land. It's not like a simple law. A simple law, it's also not easy to change, but it's easier to change, okay? I can just propose a law. People do this all the time in the government. Like here in Brazil, what was it? The ficha limpa, the clean slate, or not the clean slate, the clean record bill, which said, hey, if you have a dirty record, if you went to jail or you have some type of criminal record, you cannot, that involves corruption, okay? You cannot run for government, or people need to know about it. I forgot the details of the law. That was easier to pass. It's just a law. So you propose this bill. First, it's a bill before it's a law. And then you take it in front of the Congress, and then they vote, and then maybe it goes to the Senate, and they vote, and boom, the president can say yes or no. He can veto. It's a faster process. Changing the Constitution is a longer process because it requires a lot of states to go through this similar process of proposing and debating and voting and going back and forth before, boom, they decide that we want to change America in this fashion. So the founders made it this way on purpose because they thought, hey, we want to be able to resolve as many things as possible through regular politics. Sometimes proposals to amend the Constitution reflect deep political divisions. For example, in 1989, this is great. The Supreme Court heard a case about a man that was setting the flag on fire. Americans, especially during the Vietnam War, is when this began. Americans would burn the flag. Okay, and you can see here. Give me a second. Go here. Burning the flag. I spelled flag wrong. Well, that's loading. Let's see here. The Equal Rights Amendments. 28 states have finally ratified the ERA, but whether its protections for women's rights are actually added to the Constitution remains a question. So, we really need to get, the Constitution provides that amendments take effect when 3/4 of the states ratifying them, putting the current threshold at 38 states. And Virginia was the 38th state to ratify the ERA since Congress proposed it, technically pushing the ERA across the threshold, and yet there's still hurdles in the ERA's path. The ratification deadlines that Congress set after it approved the amendment have lapsed, and 5 states have acted to rescind the prior approval. So you see, it's a very long process. So technically, the ERA did get the 38 states to say yes, that's 3/4. But it took too long. You got to do it within a time period. But there are groups that are still trying to pass this. And here we have the burning flag. You see that? Well, burning flag, of course, this is in countries that are fighting with America. But you do have Americans that burn the flag in protest. And what does this say here? Urbana man gets $15,000 in settlement of flag burning lawsuit. Oh, so he got some money. I think maybe somebody tried to sue him, and he won the lawsuit. Let's look at this. Burning the flag, Vietnam War. This was when this really began a lot in America, because a lot of people felt that America was not acting correctly, and that fighting in Vietnam was against what America stood for. So here we go. In Texas, this guy, he sets the flag on fire. Texas had created a law that said you can't do this. You can't desecrate the flag, okay, do something bad with the flag. But when he went to the Supreme Court said no. This is in the context of a political protest and symbolic speech. So it's still illegal to desecrate the flag. So you can't take the American flag and, I don't know, poop on it or pee on it or rip it just because you want to rip it. No, there are laws against this in America, just like in Brazil. You can't do a lot of things with the Brazilian flag. I think here the laws are a little bit tougher. In fact, Chris Jericho, I was here, Brazilian flag. Let me see, I hope it doesn't show any bad images here. But Chris Jericho kicks the Brazilian flag and gets suspended. Oh, I can't show you two clips. But guys, I was here. Oh, there it is. Okay. I like wrestling. Okay. I know it's not popular in Brazil. Lucha libre, right? Wrestling. And in wrestling, what happens? If they're actors, right? I mean, it's exciting, but it's acting. And sometimes the guy acts as a good guy, and sometimes he acts as a bad guy. And Chris Jericho, as you can see here, boom, and then he kicks it. Bow! Man, oh man. He got in so much trouble for this, guys. Because in Brazil, the law is very, very strong when it comes to, let me do it like this. Oops. The law is very, very strong when it comes to desecrating the flag. You cannot do this down here in Brazil. So I was there at this event. It was at the Ginásio Ibirapuera. And I'm like, yeah, because I understand it's an act. Every country that he goes to, he calls them stupid. You stupid Germans. You're too stiff. You have no emotion. Take your flag. America first. America's the best. So that's part of his acting. And so he did this here in Brazil. And he said, oh, you Brazilians, this third world country, you just eat bananas every day. I hate you guys. So he throws the flag. And then after he was finished wrestling, I saw Polícia Federal, the federal police comes, and they go to where he was in the dressing room. They take him out of the dressing room, and he had to apologize in front of everybody and said, oh, I love your country, but they didn't understand that it was an act. But hey, when you are in a country, you got to follow the law of that country. Now, in America, you can't just destroy the flag. But if it's a political protest, yeah, you can actually burn the flag. Okay? And then members of Congress, they tried to propose a constitutional amendment to ban any form of flag desecration, but the amendment did not pass. It's been proposed many times, but it did not pass. So Americans are always with this issue with the flag. Currently, it's kneeling during the NFL games. And the players have decided as a protest to kneel during the national anthem. So Americans like this idea of protesting against something that's symbolic to America, either the flag or the anthem, to say that, hey, we feel that some things happening in the country are not right, are not correct, okay? Now, what are the Bill of Rights? If you recall from U.S. history, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It was added to the Constitution because Jefferson basically said, we feel that the Constitution is not giving enough rights to the people. How are we going to protect the people? So they weren't willing to go with the Constitution in the beginning, and then they had this idea of, let's create a Bill of Rights. These are the The bills that say not how the government works, but how the government has to work for the people and protect their rights, okay? And that's where we get freedom of speech, the right to have guns, the right to illegal searches and seizures, not the right to, but this is illegal, for the police just to knock on your door and come in, they have to have a warrant. You have the right to a jury trial. You have the right to move wherever you want. So these are the Bill of Rights. We studied this last year in U.S. history, if you recall, okay? So let's get back to it, okay? And the states, they ratified these 10 bills, and they described this as rights, and they became the Bill of Rights. And they limited government power, okay? And what is this? The incorporation doctrine. It's an interpretation of the Constitution that means the due process clause of the Fourth Amendment requires state and local governments to guarantee their citizens the rights stated in the Bill of Rights. And this incorporation doctrine, what does that mean? Okay. Basically, it's going to tell us or tell the states that these first 10 bills need to be incorporated in everything, okay, in their own laws and everything that's going on. So this is the incorporation documents. So let's look at some of these bills. Review, right, guys? You should all know this. First Amendment is giving you the freedom of speech. The freedom of speech. And it's one of the most famous amendments. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, so also freedom of religion, right? Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, remembering that some of the people up in the northern colonies specifically came to America due to religious persecution in England. And also in Pennsylvania, you had Quakers. But, there were many other religions too in America at the time. So that was the first bill that said, hey, you are free to have whatever religion you want in this country. Or abridging the freedom of speech. That means you can say whatever you want, except, we talked about this last year, I can't yell fire in a movie theater if it's something that's going to create danger for somebody. I can't threaten somebody online bullying, things like that. Some things like that are against the law. Or the press. So the free press, the newspapers are there. They can write the stories that they want. Some of them are fake news. Some of them are real news, but they're all there. You have to be smart and find out which is which. Or the right of the people to peaceably assemble. That means if you want to protest peaceably, okay, no burning things, because then the police will come. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So then the people also have the right to go to the government and say, you suck, okay? And we want to change things. So that's basically what the First Amendment says. I'm not going to read this because I basically said it already, okay? By the way, guys, if you have questions, you put them in the comments section, okay? If you're not live with me right now, and I know a lot of you can't be because you have your regular classes, just put comments in the comments section, not in live chat, but at the bottom in the comment section. So let's go into the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says that a well-regulated militia, small army, being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Bear arms doesn't mean wearing a small t-shirt, it means having a gun. Now, guys, this is the big one that divides so many people in America, right? The British, when they were in the American colonies and during the American Revolution, they tried to disarm local groups of armed citizens. These are called militias. The name in Portuguese is very similar, milicia, I believe. Okay, these militias were just ordinary citizens who had guns. So the framers of the Constitution remembered this during writing the Constitution, and they said, hey, the government cannot take away guns from people. Something that I always tell you guys, so you can think from a different perspective, is Americans don't have guns just, to kill bandidos. Okay, this is not the reason. Well, it's one of the reasons, obviously, why Americans have guns. But the reason for this amendment is to keep the government from becoming tyrannical. And if you go through history, especially in the modern times, you'll see that nearly or probably every government that became tyrannical, the first thing that they do is take away the guns, okay? Because they don't want people to be able to protect themselves when now the police and the army are on the streets patrolling. And you can think, wow, how are just people with guns going to protect themselves against the huge military? Guys, I explained this a little bit in the last class. It doesn't happen like that overnight. The military is not as big as 300 million people. So it's a threat. The fact that Americans have guns is always a threat to the government, for the government not to become totally tyrannical. I think they find other ways to be tyrannical, but showing up at your house with a bunch of armed guards is usually not the way. So this is why this bill is so important. And in 2008, the Supreme Court clarified the Second Amendment, ruling in a 5-4 decision that the amendment protected Americans' rights to use handguns for legitimate, lawful purposes, such as defending their homes. So, like the First Amendment right to speech, the Second Amendment's right to bear arms was not unlimited, and guns could still be reasonably regulated. So just like you can't yell fire, you can limit. And that's where we talked about a little bit in the last class. In some states, you can have guns outside the house. Some states, you can have guns inside the house, or you have to have the guns inside the house. And it depends on the different states, how they interpret this law. But the basic law doesn't change, which is you can have guns. The Third Amendment, okay, is one that's a little weird that I don't think we really don't use too much anymore, but who knows? And it says that the government can force the people to provide shelter for soldiers in their house, because this is something else that the British did before the revolution. But in times of war, however, Congress may require a homeowner to house soldiers, but only under conditions clearly specified out by law. So thankfully, this is not one that we've had to use that much in the US, because there haven't been too many wars on US soil other than the Civil War. But this is a amendment that is kind of skipped a lot, so much that you can see that they don't even write the amendment, because it's really not one that's used that much. And then we have the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment. This reflects the early Americans' desire to protect their privacy. Okay? So Britain used writs of assistance, general search warrants to enter private residence. The Fourth Amendment limits the government's power to conduct search and seizures. So the police can't just go into your house, okay? They need to have some type of written notice by the judge or evidence that something is happening in your house or sometimes in your car um, before they can search. There are some exceptions, okay? If, for example, you are arrested, then the government, then the police can search you, okay, if they can find evidence to arrest people and charge them with a crime. But they have to have probable cause, which means something that links you to a crime. So searching a home requires a search warrant. Now, this law, again, it's debated a lot. In America, I'm sorry, not America, in New York, a few years back, there was a, who was it? Search and frisk, I believe, was the name of this procedure that the police were able to just stop people on the street randomly and just search them and frisk them and see if they had anything on them. A lot of people got upset with this because it was targeting mainly blacks. And in fact, Mayor Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York during this time, he ran for president. He spent a lot of money to run for president, and he just, you know, it was a mess. Anyway, that's another story. But one of the reasons he was attacked was search and frisk. All the Democrats attacked him and said, man, you were mayor during this time. This is a terrible thing, blah, 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 blah. And he dropped out of the race. I think he won the island of Samoa or something. But he spent a lot of money. Oh, my goodness. But he's a billionaire, so I guess he's got money to spend. So, yes, these are searches and seizures. So some people think that it shouldn't be legal for the police just to see you walking down the street, think you look suspect, usually because you're black, you look suspect, and then just stop you and then be able to search your body and try to find drugs or a gun or something. The Fifth Amendment, it protects people accused of crimes. Okay, first, you can't be you can't be tried for a serious crime unless a grand jury has decided there's enough evidence. So first, you go to the grand jury where your lawyers and the prosecution will present the case, and then the grand jury is going to say, yes, there's enough evidence, let's go to trial, or no, there's not enough evidence, drop it. A person found innocent, okay, if you are found innocent after the trial, you can't be tried again for the same offense. This is called double jeopardy. And there's a really cheesy movie about double jeopardy that I think you could watch. No one can be forced to testify against themselves. If you are on the stand and you are being asked questions, okay, you can refuse to answer. So you cannot convict yourself. So if somebody asks you, where were you during the US government class? And you know you were doing something you shouldn't be doing, like watching YouTube videos, you have the right to say, I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. I cannot convict myself. You have to prove that I was watching YouTube videos. I'm not going to tell you that I was. Okay? So that's a very important law. And if anybody watches law shows or law movies and they hear somebody say, I plead the fifth, that's what they're saying. They're saying, I'm not going to answer that question. Proof that I wasn't doing something bad, although it does make you look guilty if you plead the fifth. And no one can be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. So the government needs to follow all the constitutional procedures in all its actions. I can't just put you in jail because I want to. I can't just take away your house because I want to, or because I think you're a bad guy. I need to follow the Constitution. Okay? The Fifth Amendment also defines the government's right to eminent domain. Now, this is interesting because it just said that the government can't take away your property without due process, but the government has the power of eminent domain. And what is eminent domain? Whoops. Hi, Beatrice. Good to see you. Eminent domain is basically saying that, oh, I'm very tiny. Let's make myself bigger. There I am. Let me go over here. Eminent domain is saying that if we think that your land or your property is somewhere very important for us, that maybe we need to build a dam or an oil pipes or anything like that, we as the government have the right to take this land. Now, man, oh man, people that are very constitutionalist get very angry about this. I used to work for a lady on the radio who was a libertarian, and libertarians try to be as constitutional as possible, as little government as possible. And she used to get so angry on the radio about eminent domain. She says, this is not constitutional. How, it's my property. How can you take it? So they put this little asterisk in there about eminent domain. So let's get back. The Sixth Amendment. We are moving through these amendments, guys. This amendment gives an accused person several important rights. The first is a speedy public trial. It has to be fast. Doesn't always happen, but relatively fast. Also, I can't hold you forever without awaiting a trial. So there's the process. Processes are going on. So people that are in jail waiting to go to trial, they constantly have to go to court. The process is happening. Okay, they can't just put you there and say, okay, we believe you stole some cookies, and when we get enough evidence that you stole some cookies, we'll go to trial. And hey, that could take long time. Okay, so this is illegal. I have to have enough evidence. I have to show that the trial is moving forward to keep you in jail. This protection prevents the government from silencing its critics, as often happens under dictatorships. Okay, in dictatorships, people will just go to jail or disappear, and they can stay there forever until the government has enough evidence to prove that they were doing something bad. A public trial also assures that justice is carried out in the full view of the people. Okay, so everybody can see that, hey, they did this correctly, they didn't do this correctly. Now, I'll tell you something. After 9/11, okay, after 9/11, there was the Patriot Act. And a lot of people believe Patriot Act is unconstitutional. There you go. Because two provisions of the USA Patriot Act are unconstitutional because they allow search warrants to be issued without showing probable cause. A federal judge ruled Wednesday. So this was a big debate. And what is the Patriot Act? After 9/11, people were scared in America. So a lot of lawmakers got together and decided to create this Patriot Act, which are these laws that are there to protect Americans from the big bad evil terrorists. And they are big bad and evil, but they're not always your next door neighbor. That's the problem, okay? And most of the time they're not your next door neighbor. But this act, it gave law enforcement a lot of power. And it said, hey, if somebody looks a little different, like me, I got this big nose here. I remember after, you see my big nose, after 9/11, man, oh man, so many people. I don't have my hat with me, but I always like to wear hats. So I like to wear my hat. I got the goatee. A lot of people ask me, hey, are you Egyptian? I used to be so scared in America after 9/11. In the Patriot Act, it basically said that if somebody looks suspicious, if we think they're a terrorist, first it said, hey, call your local law enforcement, and two, the police can just go and arrest you. And then you would go to a place called Guantanamo Bay, which we studied last year. It's a military base in Cuba. And you could be there for a very long time. In fact, a lot of people were. In fact, there's a great radio interview with a guy that was in Guantanamo Bay for a very long time. He was not guilty. He was not a terrorist. He was from the Middle East. So, yeah, the Patriot Act was not cool because of this. You know, it kind of stretched the powers of the American government and was unconstitutional. It just allowed people to wire your phones. The FBI could listen to your conversations. They could go into your house. They could arrest you. So you got to be vigilant, guys. If you want freedom to exist, you got to be vigilant. Whoops. I want to add this to my stream. And I want to make my camera disappear. And I want to make this bigger. Beatrice, by the way, I got your email, but I didn't see the first email that you sent. I will look again, okay? I'm a little busy today, but I will look. And I will try to help you with your question that you had about the homework. This weekend, I'll probably won't be able to do it, okay? So now we have we just talked about the Sixth Amendment, right? So you can't be, so Patriot Act kind of violated the Fourth, but I think it violated the Sixth too, because some people were put in jail for a very long time. Also, the Sixth Amendment provides a trial by jury. So a person can ask for just a trial by judge, but in this case, it gives the accuser the right to know, what are you accusing me of? They can prepare so they can prepare their defense, and they have the right to hear all questions, all witnesses against them, to compel witnesses to testify in court for them, and to be defended by a lawyer. So this is an important amendment if you are ever in legal problems in America. And by the way, if you are in America and you get into some legal problems, you do have a lot of these rights. Okay, not all of the rights, but most of them, yes. Especially when it comes to law and stuff like that. If you're on U.S. soil, because think about it this way: this is to protect citizens, but at the same time, it's kind of telling us what the government has to do. So just because you're a Brazilian in America, the court has to operate the same way. Okay, the police should operate the same way. They can't just change how they act because, hey, it's Beatrice and she's a Brazilian. No, they have to act basically in the same way. Now, some of the rights are more like, the right to bear arms and stuff like that. It's more for Americans. This is how Americans are allowed to act. But these are telling me how the government should act towards the people, okay? So you can't just change this overnight because you got in trouble in America. But don't get in trouble in America. That's the best thing to do. And especially because every state has different laws. Okay. The Seventh Amendment. This amendment provides the right to a jury trial in federal courts to settle all disputes about property worth more than $20. When both parties in a conflict agree, however, a judge rather than a jury may hear evidence and decide the case. So this is just federal courts. Okay, you have the right to a jury trial in federal court. You go to federal court if you broke a federal law, which are usually the big laws. Okay. Maybe if you embezzled money, stole a lot of money, because then it's affecting people in various places across the United States. Maybe terrorism charges, maybe what else could be a federal, maybe some murder charges or kidnapping, or if you transport things from one state to another, it starts to get into federal laws, okay, not state laws. The Eighth Amendment. This prohibits excessive bail. Bail is the money that somebody pays to allow you to get out of jail. So if you are arrested and then you are in the jail, but you're not going to trial yet, and instead of waiting in jail to go to trial, you can get taken out of jail, and you cannot have excessive bail, something that is way too expensive for you to pay. Okay? And also, it doesn't allow judges to give you a very serious crime if you're convicted, or a very high fine if you're convicted of a crime, although it depends. If the crime is very high, sometimes the fine is very high. And also the Eighth Amendment, it bans cruel and unusual punishments. So no torture. Or like if you stole some cookies, you can't get life in prison. It has to be kind of equal. So this is subjective, of course, but generally it works. Generally. Although some people may argue that, like for drug crimes, like, oh my God, you can be in jail for 10 years for having a drug that in some states is legal now. So, some people can argue that's excessive. Some people argue the death penalty is excessive. And but again, it's an argument. Some states have the death penalty, some states don't have the death penalty. So it goes on a state-by-state basis. And that's what's cool about the Constitution, is that you can interpret it. And I think it was made like this so that each state can kind of still be independent in their thinking on some of these issues, depending on their culture. Like, for example, Virginia, or, you can have hunting rifles because it's a hunting state. So if you're in a hunting state, of course, the state is going to look at the Second Amendment and say, yeah, of course, people are allowed to carry their guns outside of their house. Of course, it makes sense. Now, a state that's not a hunting state, like New Jersey, is not really, you can hunt in New Jersey, but it's not really. So you can have your guns outside your house, but you got to keep it in the trunk of your car. Like, you can't walk down the street with it because it's not a rural state. It's not like you're being out in the fazenda, you're not out in the farm. So people don't want to go to the shopping mall and see a bunch of people with guns. So you have to kind of look at it that way. Or New York City, you can't have a gun on the street in New York City. That would create panic. But you go to other states that are more rural, or even Texas, I guess. In some cities in Texas, you can have a gun on your side. So everybody can interpret these things in their own way. The Ninth Amendment. it prevents the government from claiming that the only rights people have are those listed in the Bills of Rights. Now, this is probably my favorite. No, I think the first and second, I like a lot. But the ninth is cool because it says, hey guys, we can't think of everything. So the Ninth Amendment says that the Constitution doesn't say that this limits what rights people have. Okay, and the government can't say that the only rights people have are the ones in the Bill of Rights. Because you like the right to get married if you're gay. Hey, that's not in the Constitution. It doesn't say you now are going to be able to get married because you're gay. But history, society moved to a point. Society moved to a point where people said, I feel that this is a right that I have. Okay? So you have to consider the Ninth Amendment for that. All right, moving ahead. The 10th Amendment. Unlike the other amendments, the 10th Amendment did not add any new rights. It says that powers not delegated to the United States nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. In other words, any powers not given to the federal government are retained by the states or the people. Again, this is a cool little right or amendments, because it says, hey, we couldn't think of everything. Anything that is not written in the Constitution. Oh, this dog is so annoying sometimes. But he's cute, but he's annoying. I want to be his friend, but he doesn't want to be my friend, which is so sad. Or she. There you go. Now she's a little quiet. Anyway, guys. So it says that any of the rights that are not in the Constitution or not in the federal government, in the Bill of Rights, the states can decide. Okay, the states have the power to decide these things, and they do. Okay, they definitely do. So what protections are guaranteed in the First Amendment? We just talked about it. Religious rights, freedom of speech, protests, addressing concerns for the government. So let's now move to the later amendments. How have amendments changed the Constitution? So these later amendments can be divided. They're divided into three main parts, okay, three groups. Some are structural changes, okay, changing the way that the government is run. Some are extending the government power. Like we just did that in U.S. history yesterday, income tax. And extending individual rights. Okay, so structural changes. A structural change could be like, term limits for president. In individual rights, obviously, we can talk about voting rights and things like that. So structural changes of the Constitution changes how the structure of power in the different branches. Article 3, Section 1 gives the federal courts jurisdiction in cases arising between states, between citizens of different states or between states and citizens of another state. But the 11th Amendment later prohibited states from being sued in federal court by citizens or another state or another nation, okay? So this was a little bit of a change here, where it says that, hey, the federal government can't sue state, et cetera, et cetera. So states have a little bit more independence Okay. So here are some other structural changes. We have the 12th Amendment. It calls for the Electoral College, which we studied last year. Remember, the US is a very different voting system than Brazil. It's not direct votes. You vote for people who are then going to vote to represent your voice, okay? So this is going to also create separate ballots for president and vice presidents. The 17th Amendment says that people, not state legislatures, elect United States senators directly. This was during the Progressive Era. We just studied this in U.S. History 2. Also, and U.S. History 2, the class, we studied this last year, U.S. History 2. Because there's a lot of corruption, right? Because then the politicians could put the people that they wanted in the Senate, and this was not cool. This was not cool. So Congress tried to pass this amendment several times, but then there were so many scandals involving vote buying that state legislatures finally helped the amendment pass. There's the 20th Amendment in 1933. It says that the president and vice president need to be inaugurated January 20th of the year following the election. But we're changing that. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread that. It set new dates. Before it was January 20th, and then it changed to January 3rd of every other year. Or am I reading that incorrectly, guys? The 20th Amendment sets new dates for when the president and vice president are inaugurated. Okay, so the president and vice president are inaugurated on January 20th, and Congress begins January 3rd of every year. Okay, important stuff there. 20th Amendment, I think we skipped that one last year. And then we have the 22nd. That one we definitely studied. It limits presidents to 2 terms because FDR was president for 4 terms from 1933 to 1945. So they said, hey, we need to make this a law, constitutional law, and not just a tradition to, stay for 2 terms. And the 25th establishes a process for the vice president to take over the office of president if the president is disabled. The amendment also establishes the process for filling the vice president if that office becomes vacant. Okay, that's crazy that they waited so long for this amendment. I mean, this was already happening, but I guess they just wanted to make it official. Okay, so it just says that if the president can't do his job, the vice president takes over. If the vice president can't do his job, then who becomes the president now? And there's a whole process to that. I believe it's who becomes the new vice president? I think it's the majority leader of the Senate. So anyway, there's a whole process to that. And then we have the 27th Amendment, which was 1992. That's the most recent. Makes congressional pay raises effective during the term following their passage. Originally proposed as part of the Bill of Rights in '89, it did not have the sufficient votes for ratification. A campaign to pass it began in 1980 and finally became law. So if there's a change in pay, it's not going to happen automatically. It's the next term. So these are structural changes. And we're gonna see if this moves ahead or not. Sometimes it locks. It's good for that. Hello. Oh, that's not working. So I guess I have to go and close it. I hate doing this. I'm gonna go to McGraw-Hill. McGraw-Hill. This happens sometimes. We got 4 people. That's pretty cool, guys. Thanks for coming if you were able to. I know a lot of you weren't able to. But unfortunately, I can only do the class at this time because I have to leave in a little bit. So let's do that. If your computer does the same thing, guys, this is what you have to do. It kind of sucks, but hey, it's life. And then you click on it again. And then we are not on chapter 15. We are on, oh, did I click US history? All right, let's go back to connected. US, because I see US. So let's do that. United States government. We got the annotated. It should open to where we stopped. Sometimes it does that, which is really cool. It's nice when it does that. Yeah. Is that it? We're on lesson 3, but we were on page 9 or 10. I think we were going to page 10. So let's click on page 9 first, just to make sure. Yes, page 10. We're almost finished, guys. This lesson. Okay, so extensions of government power. So 2 amendments gave the government more power, but one was repealed. The 16th Amendment gave power to Congress to levy individual income taxes. Okay. In 1895, the Supreme Court reversed a previous decision and declared a federal income tax unconstitutional. This prevented passage of another income tax law until the Constitution was amended in 1913. So this is an amendment that a lot of people hate. The 18th Amendment prohibited the manufacture and sale and transportation of alcoholic beverages, but it was overturned with the 21st Amendment. That was prohibition. We studied that a lot. And then the ones that you guys probably know the most, and most people know the most because they affect society. They have affected society so much, are the individual rights, okay? And many of them are amendments that extend the constitutional individual rights. So a lot of them deal with voting rights. But let's go. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. Okay, these are the civil rights amendments, the Civil War, sorry. The 13th in 1865 outlawed slavery. That's why Martin Luther King gave his speech in 1965. It was what you would call symbolic, right? 100 years later. The 14th Amendment prohibits a state from depriving a person of life, liberty, and property. Let me make sure I'm not giving you wrong information, though, because I just said that off the top of my head, but 1965, I have a dream, right? I'm pretty sure we, 1965. Oh no, 1963. Yeah, the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. Okay, interesting. When was the I Have a Dream speech? Ask Google. 1963. So my apologies. Yeah, I confused that because the act was passed in 1965. So it was symbolic still because they were able to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which was the big one that changed a lot of things for the better in America. And then we have the 14th Amendment. okay, which prohibits states from depriving a person of life, liberty, or property without due process. We looked at that already. And the 15th Amendment prohibits the government from denying a person a right to vote based on race. But, they put a lot of blockades on the road to that. And then the 19th Amendment, all you girls know, because a lot of you wrote this for your work last year, your research paper, guaranteed the women the right to vote. And then we had the 23rd Amendment. Look at this. Before the 23rd Amendment was passed, 1961, citizens living in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, were denied the right to vote for president and vice president because they did not live in a state. This amendment gives the District of Columbia 3 presidential electors to represent them in the Electoral College, the number to which it would be entitled if it were a state. Interesting. So residents of DC still do not have full representation in Congress. They have a non-voting delegate. Oh, cool. So 23rd Amendment allowed people that lived in Washington, D.C. Because you got to understand, Washington, D.C., it's like its own it's a district of Columbia. It's like its own mini bubble, right? So even though it's inside the state of, is it Maryland, I believe, Washington, D.C., it's this separate entity. So if you live inside the state, you don't always have all the rights of people living outside of this state. So this kind of fixed that. It gave some of these people the right to vote. Okay, think it's like kind of like the Vatican. The Vatican it's like its own country, but it's not at the same time. It's like inside Italy, but it's like its own little bubble inside of that. I think the DF here in Brazil probably operates the same way. It's kind of outside and inside at the same time. So after the Civil War, some southern states created poll taxes, which required people to pay to vote. So in 1964, this was prohibited in federal elections. And in 1971, the right to vote, the age was lowered to 18. And this is because a lot of kids were going to Vietnam that were 18. So they were like, hey, we can die for this country, but we can't vote for the people that are sending us to die. That doesn't sound right. So they asked for this amendment to be passed, and it was passed. Changes to our understanding of the Constitution. So how has it changed? Amending the Constitution is the only way to change the content of the document. Our understanding of the meaning of the content has evolved over time. Okay. So, for example, the Constitution gives the House of Representatives the power to impeach or formally accuse federal officials. This just happened up in the U.S. with President Trump, but he was not. Nothing happened in the end. He was not found guilty, or he didn't even go to trial. They didn't have enough. They didn't have enough evidence to impeach him. Okay, so first you have to get the evidence. So it follows a similar process. First you have to get the evidence, and then you impeach. Impeachment is the trial, and then he's found guilty or not guilty, but they didn't even get to the impeachment part. Article 2 of the Constitution states that an official can be removed from office if he's convicted of treason, that if you go against the country, like colluding with the Russians, bribery, which is what they, I think that's what they tried to say Trump did, because they tried to say that he was going to withhold funds to, was it Ukraine? If the president of the Ukraine didn't investigate Joe Biden, who is now the vice president. No, he was Obama's vice president and is now going to run for president against Trump. And there were some issues with Joe Biden's son, because he ended up going to this country in Europe and becoming like a very powerful person in a company, and he didn't have a lot of what's the word, experience. How did he get this job? What's going on? Very similar if you think of Lula, little Lula. Lula's son has a lot of things like that, where how did Lula's son become a millionaire? Or like, he does nothing, but yet he got a lot of money, and he became a important person in some companies, and you're like, how does that happen? Anyway, there are debates. What is a high crime and misdemeanor? Some argue that it covers only criminal behavior, while others include abuse of power. So maybe that could be what Trump, they said, was trying to do. So what do you think? You don't have to write a journal entry about this, but you should think about this, okay? Because this is part of the government now. Like I said, just happened with Trump, may happen now with Bolsonaro. You know, some people may accuse him of a high crime if he continues to say, "Hey, Brazil is gonna go stop the quarantine," and some people may say, "Hey, man, I mean, this is a health issue. This is you're affecting the health and well-being of Brazilian citizens if you do this. This is a crime. Okay, you're putting people in danger." You can make that argument. So American government and Brazilian government are different in some ways. In a lot of ways, they're very similar, okay? I think the difference that I notice is that the Brazilian government, one, is way more corrupt. There's way more corruption that happens here. And it's very bloated. It's much bigger. The government machine here is much bigger. So this creates, there's many more laws, many more procedures, many more everything. But the basic structure is very similar. It's a republic. Brazil is a republic too. So it follows some of the same things. It just doesn't always do them exactly the same way. So let's get here to page 12. And judicial review, okay? Again, we studied this before. When the federal courts decide cases, they are interpreting the meaning of the words and the phrases in the Constitution that are imprecise. They're not exact, okay? So the courts have the power to review federal laws and determine whether something violates the Constitution. They give here the example of Wisconsin versus Yoder. The Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment's right to freedom of religion allows Amish families to keep their children home after 8th grade, even though the state law requires school attendance to a later age. But they're like, hey, but the Amish, they want to keep their kids at home, so they have this right, okay? And there's even some tougher cases with this, especially with Christian Scientists who don't believe in going to the doctor. They believe that God is going to cure their child that's sick. And well, is this mistreating a child? You know, according to the law, is this child mistreatment? And it becomes a debate. Do they have the freedom of religion to do this or not? Okay, or even conscientious protesters, is that the word? These are people that don't go to war, like Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like that. Conscientious protesters? Objectors, that's the word I'm looking for. Conscientious objector. And these are people that are not going to go to war because they believe it goes against their religion, it goes against their philosophy, and anything like that. Changes in the membership of the court and in social and political conditions affect how the courts interpret the Constitution, okay? So the Supreme Court right now is starting to become more conservative because Trump was able to put 2 people in there, I believe, two or three. but I think he's going to end up being able to put 3 because Judge Ginsburg is very old, and I don't think she's going to survive 2 Trump terms. And then when the Supreme Court becomes more one way than another, that's going to affect how they rule on a case. In a lot of cases, guys, are 5-4, 5-4, 5-4. Okay, so you can see how that one swing vote can make a big difference. Let's see, for example, we have the Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal did not violate the Constitution. But then 60 years later, the Supreme Court reversed this position and said, no, it definitely is not constitutional to create a bathroom for blacks and a bathroom for whites, a restaurant for blacks and a restaurant for whites. This is not constitutional, but it's because the Supreme Court was different at that time, okay? Abortion, right, is a big issue in America. And if the court becomes more conservative, that could change abortion laws. Either it could become illegal completely, or it could become now a state issue. Then it's like marijuana or gay marriage before it was a federal law. So then each state can decide whether they can have an abortion, a woman can have an abortion or not. Okay, so the Supreme Court definitely can affect the law of the land. And some of this language was written like this on purpose. It wasn't so specific on purpose because, you know, things change. There's technological changes. There's situations that the founding fathers couldn't have imagined. So they didn't write this document in some parts a little vague because they didn't know what they were doing. It's because they knew exactly what they were doing. They said, hey, man, I mean, in 1780, they knew history and they knew that 1780 wasn't the same as 1680. Things change. Technology changes. So how could they imagine iPads and computers and cars and all these things in the future? So they had to create a document that could adapt, okay? And there's some questions here at the end. What is probable cause? That's when the police believes that you have committed a crime because they found evidence. What is the process of amending the Constitution? Remember, 2/3 of the vote in the House and Senate, 3/4 of the states, okay? There's a lot of ways that you can amend. That's right in the beginning of the chapter. The rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights are your rights more than the government's rights. And, you know, every amendment, guys, really changes how the society, how America views itself. So, guys, there I am in the corner. That's it for today, okay? I will see you guys when? Next Thursday, I guess. I'll see you. And I'll make this big. Oh, there I am. Ooh, my hair is all crazy. I will see you next Thursday at regular class time. Thank you for hanging out with me. We need to finish this chapter, and then we are going to have a lab class, maybe 2 lab classes, because you guys need to catch up with some of your work. I have a nice little graphic organizer that Jesus sent me that shows who did their work and who didn't. So we're keeping track, guys, and we need to do this, okay? Because otherwise you're going to be very much behind. And now you really only have to do the quizzes, guys, so come on. All right? Okay, have a great weekend. Adios, amigos. And next class will be lesson 4 of chapter 3. Bye-bye.